And at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. He's a native Clevelander, and Peter Jedick. His career has been as a best-selling author and historian over several decades. On a national scale, he has authored 4 books and written for several magazines, including America in World War II and Baseball America. He's a recipient of the Excellence in Journalism Award from the Press Club of Cleveland. Has written for every major news organization, including the Cleveland Plain Dealer, Cleveland Magazine, Sun Newspapers, and Cleveland Press. He also had a stint as an award-winning radio commentator on WKSU, an NPR station. He's best known for his novels. His first was Hippies, which is available on Amazon, a fictional account of campus life surrounding the tragic events of the 1970 Kent State shootings, and he was there along with his lovely wife. They were both there to witness that. He's shared that at many campuses around the country, including Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Ohio State. Graduated cum laude with honors from Kent State University in '71, then became a firefighter and served as a firefighter in Cleveland for many years. His second novel, The West Tech Terrorist, is available on Amazon, a fictional account of life in Cleveland when the U.S. was on the brink of war and Elliot Ness was Cleveland's safety director. He also authored League Park, a book detailing the early days of Cleveland history, and his first professional baseball stadium was very instrumental in League Park being able to be saved. Unfortunately, that book is unavailable, but you can get it on Amazon Kindle. Peter and I also discovered we had something in common. We were both graduates of 1967, with one more person in the audience. And Peter and I were both class presidents of 1967. He at West Tech, and I was at Wycliffe. I have also read his book, The West Tech Terrorist, and I found it to be quite enjoyable. And above all, I learned that Peter Jedick is truly a master storyteller. So I'd like to turn this over to our speaker tonight, Peter Jedick.
Thanks so much, Ed. And thank you to Ed Rosenberg. And that's not my wife, that's Ed Rosenberg's wife, Liz. So that was a slip of the tongue, that's all right. I really appreciate you guys. Ed's the one, I was at a West Tech reunion with Liz when I ran into Ed, and he told me about the club. We talked, he invited me here we had lunch, introduced me to the president, and that's how I got here. So make a long story short, this is an honor and a privilege. I love history. This is so much history, I can't believe it. And I love books, and you can look around me. You know, this is unbelievable. So really, thank you for having me here. So I'm going to talk about self-publishing, I guess. And I just want to get to the, before I get into that, I think I'd give you a little quick background on how I became a writer. I'm always asked, how did you get into writing? And happened one day, like just me and Liz went to the West Tech High School right there on the west side. It was the largest high school in Ohio. People don't realize that. It was a huge high school. It had like almost 4,000 kids. And the thing was, I'm sitting in an English class, and all of a sudden there's a knock at the door, and another English teacher wants to come in. This is probably prearranged, and talk to us. And he says, anybody want to write for the West Tech Tatler? That's the school newspaper. I'm sure you're all of the age, you all love newspapers like I did. And you probably all might have had high school newspapers, which they don't have anymore. It's kind of sad, but that's another subject. But so I said, yeah, I like, newspapers. That'd be kind of cool to write for it. So I go to the meeting, and next thing I know, I'm a sports writer. I'm writing for covering the football team. And I don't want to get too far off the subject because I know you want me to talk self-publishing. But the reason I'm writing about the football team is because I couldn't play, because my mother wouldn't sign the permission slip. And I hated her for that, but I was a quarterback and a safety in grade school and junior high at a CYO Catholic grade school. And I thought I could play with the big leagues at West Tech, but I kept breaking my ankles. And she didn't think I should keep breaking my ankles. And so she probably saved me a lot of concussions. And if I had played, I probably wouldn't remember what I'm doing here. So, so I owe her actually. So I used to hate her for it, but forgive me. So that's how I became a writer. And I just found out Liz was at Kent State with me. And then I went to Kent State and I went on an Ed Bang scholarship. I don't know if you ever heard of that. That was, if I hadn't got that, I would have been with Ed, this other Ed, President Ed at Cleveland State. I was going to go to Cleveland State, live at home. I didn't have any money. My parents didn't have any money. So I was going to live there and get a summer job and go to Cleveland State, because tuition wasn't that, like it is today, wasn't that bad, And so the day I graduated, thanks to my West Tech mentor, he put me in for his Ed Bang scholarship, which was a big deal at the time. I didn't realize that looking back on it. It paid for half of my college education, which would be worth a fortune today. So I went to Kent State, luckily, and it changed up my whole life. So I owe Mr. Dietrich, that was his name. So otherwise I would have been at Cleveland State. We were the same, like you said, we were the same age. We would probably been friends back then. We probably would have been friends 50 years. But so anyway, so then I get to Kent State and I write for the Kent Stater, which was the college newspaper again. And that's really a good journalism background, just writing instead of just, I always thought it was better. I always say I learned everything I needed to know about journalism at West Tech and Kent State writing for the newspapers, as much as the journalism classes. So when I graduated, I had long hair and a beard, like a hippie. You'll see my picture in my hippie book there. And I put a tie on and a shirt, and I go to a plain dealer, and when you get out of college, you think you're so full of yourself. Yeah, here I am, I'm ready to write for the plain dealer, And I walk in, and the secretary looks at me like I'm a space alien because I had the beard and the long hair and a suit and tie on, I looked out of place, and that wasn't the problem. But the problem was then I talked to the editor. He said, no, you just don't jump into this. This is the big league, is the plain dealer. Back then, in fact, I was just at a lunch today, a press club lunch, and they said he used to have 450 writers for the plain dealer back in those days. That's how big it was. And, it was the big leagues. He said, you got to go to the minors, like in baseball. You got to go to get a small town like Ashtabula or Lorraine, and you work for their paper, and then you work your way up to the big time. And well, I was having some, not me, but my family was having some problems. My dad was a World War II vet. He had some problems. So I had to stay home. So I didn't know what I was kind of bouncing around. I was driving a cab, doing all kinds of crazy jobs. And I saw a little ad in the paper about Cleveland Magazine. So I go to Cleveland Magazine. They said they're hiring writers. I said, this would be this brand new magazine. So I said, oh, this would be great. I'll write for this Cleveland Magazine maybe, So I go down and talk to the editor there, Mike Roberts. And I got some stories about, I want to make it short because I want to talk about the self-publishing. But long story short, eventually I become the writer, the historical writer for the Cleveland Magazine. And the first story I wrote was about Euclid Avenue and the mansions on Euclid Avenue, which right here. You guys are part of it. This building's part of it, So, I love that. And they had all these pictures of it, and they actually paid me $200, which was a lot of money back then, I traveled around Europe for 3 months on $200, so I was, so for $200 I was doing good, So I thought, this is great. I'm going to be a magazine writer and all this stuff. And like I said, long story short, so I wrote a story about the Terminal Tower. I was talking to Kip over there about the advanced swear engines, and I wrote about the history of the Terminal Tower, and I wrote about the history of the Elliott Ness. So I was writing all these stories for Cleveland Magazine. And meanwhile, I was driving a cab to pay for the bills, and I'd stop on my way to between runs, and I'd go to Historical Society or the Public Library downtown and do my research, because the problem with writing history, it takes a lot of, guys know this, just takes a lot of research, For that one magazine story, I was telling them about Elliott Ness. I interviewed over 100 people that knew Elliott Ness. So, you have to put a lot of work into this stuff. And so I was doing all these history ones. So I'm a baseball guy too. I did play baseball at Tech. She let me play baseball. And I played baseball at Kent State. So I love baseball. And I heard about this old field, League Park, down there on 66th and Chester. And so I said, oh, this would be great. I'll write a story about Old League Park, So I made a mistake. I teach a class sometimes on freelance writing. Don't ever do this. But I did it on my own, and I didn't talk to the editor, Mike Roberts, about this League Park story. I just said, every story I was writing, usually he'd tell me, hey, we want to write a story about the Terminal Tower, okay. I kind of did this one on my own, but I thought I wouldn't have any problem just, write this story and giving it to him. And so I did all this research. I talked to the old baseball players like Mel Harder and Bob Feller. They were still around. and even the guys that took care of the grounds and the people that used to go to League Park. I did all this research and I wrote a story about it. And I thought this is a pretty good story, so I give it to Mike Roberts and I say, hey, I got another story for you. He said, what is it? I said, it's League Park. What's League Park? He says, that's where the Indians used to play. He says, what do you mean? He says, yeah, it's the old baseball field before they built Cleveland Stadium. Now we got Progressive Field, but then we had Cleveland Stadium. So he says, nobody cares about old baseball fields. He says, I'm sorry, I'm not interested, And I said, oh man, I did all this work. I did all this research, and I researched it, and, I had this nice story, I thought, but I didn't know what to do with it, And I was kicking myself the other day. I'm trying to figure out, how did I come up with this idea of self-publishing it? I was going to, my options were thrown in a wastebasket and go on to my next story, or, figure out what to do with it. And I don't know, I still don't know. I asked some people who were helping me with it back then, and they don't know either. So I came up with this idea of writing this book about League Park. So, and publishing myself. And so that's how I became self-published and an author. I'll show you the book. You guys probably saw it sitting here, It's not even a book, to be honest with you. It's a pamphlet. I charged $2.95, $3 back then. So, I printed it, and the trouble with being a publisher, the publisher does the nuts and the bolts of a writer. That's why you have a publisher, because they do all the work. They have to print it, they have to distribute it, they have to take a gamble because you have to pay for it. You have to pay the printer to print it, and then you have to go to the bookstores and distribute it, and you have to market it. That's the hard part too. That's what publishers do, So I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to take a loan out. I think I was telling this story not too long ago. I think I paid $1,000 to get like 1,000 copies, because it cost me $1 a copy. That was a lot of money back then, I think my first house only cost like $10,000 or something like that, So the house I was living in at the time, I was living all over the near west side by the zoo. So that was a big gamble, and then I had to print them. And actually, though, it was a family affair. My wife, I think, which one was it? My sister and my wife. My sister did the cover, the drawing for the cover out of an old postcard, and then my wife did the layout. You have to pay somebody to do that, all this stuff. We'll talk about that later, the layout, where the pictures are, and how to put the pictures on the page and make it all fit and all that stuff. So you need artists that do that, So I had an artist. My wife was an artist, and my sister were both artists, and so they did that for me, and I thought it was a pretty good book. And then I had to distribute it, so I had to drive around. I remember my daughter. I had a daughter who was like 1 year old, and it's just, sorry, just thinking about this. We drive around the bookstores, and she's in the back seat with me, So that's pretty cool, She was my good luck charm. So I took this gamble. I got a loan, and I'm dropping them off at all the bookstores, and then, but then I had to get some publicity, because that's the problem is marketing. How does anybody know about it? It's a book, but nobody knows about it. So we had this League Park Day. Hal Lebowitz, you guys remember him from the Plain Dealer? Hal Lebowitz. He's a sports editor for a long time. He was a great guy. So he gets wind of this League Park Day. We organized this League Park Day where we had we went down to the old League Park. Was still a lot there. Yes, the stands were still there. I mean, it's crumbling. The city of Cleveland wasn't taking care of it. I think it was a playground, right, a basketball court. That was about it. And nobody was playing baseball on it anymore. It was kind of falling apart. But so we had this League Park Day to try to save League Park. So Hal Lebowitz, I call him up, and he writes this huge story. Like, it wasn't on the front page of the sports page. It was on the page 2, but it was the whole page. And I found it, somebody found it for me the other day, digitized. I'm trying to get a hard copy, but it's so big you can't make a copy of it, so I'm trying to, because I would have liked to bring that. And so we do this League Park Day, and he gives me all this publicity, about we're going to do this, we're going to save League Park, and we're going to make it, the idea of League Park Day, we're going to make it a Cleveland landmark. So they couldn't mess with it. And they were going to make it an Ohio State. I don't know if that was the same time or a little bit later. We made it an Ohio State historic place. So if you want to tear it down and build an office building there or something, you have to go through a lot of paperwork. It's hard to do. We're trying to save it. So anyway, so I got all that publicity about League Park Day, and then I get more wind of it. They have me on the morning exchange. That was back then. Everybody, everybody read the Plain Dealer, everybody watched the Morning Exchange. And then Lanigan I got on Lanigan somehow, I don't know, I was just calling people. And he gets me on there and he's like, he owned back before he had 25 channels, he had about 3 channels, and he owned the whole morning shows, So all of a sudden I'm getting all this publicity as I'm an author, I didn't know I was an author, I was just writing a little book. So I got all this publicity and I sold a lot of books. In fact, I sold enough of these, I don't want to talk about myself so much, but just as being a self-publisher, so you understand, I sold enough copies of this to be a New York Times best-selling author. But I didn't know it, because I didn't know what I was doing as a publisher. I sold like twice as many copies as there's like a certain level you have to sell to get to that level, and I sold like twice as many of these, and it was only $3, so. But the thing was, the self-published part I'll talk to you about, it cost me $1 to print it, and then, so every time I sold it for $3, I made $2, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you do enough copies, you make some money. But I had to distribute it. And back then, they had all these bookstores, not like today, all the bookstores or something else that's disappearing. I'm sure you know. We had all the independent stores, they were all over the place. There aren't too many left, like the one in Cleveland Heights, MacBooks is one of the few left, and there's a couple left, but there aren't the bookstores were everywhere, and all the big ones, Borders and all those bookstores. So I deliver it, but they wouldn't pay for it. They call it on consignment, which means they'll take it, and if they sell it, then they say take 10 books, and if they order more, then they pay you for the 10 they sold. So this is the trouble with self-publishing, is that you got to sell them. Most people aren't going to buy them unless they do it. Well, it's different now, but anyway, when I'll get to that later to tell you about self-publishing. But that was the problem, and then I had to distribute it. Me and my daughter drive around, drop these off at the bookstores. You have to talk to each manager, hey, and you mind taking this book? And they say, well, who cares about old baseball fields? And same problem as I had with the editor of Cleveland Magazine. But actually, there was a nostalgic wave going on at the time, and I was lucky because they were talking about tearing down Cleveland Stadium and building this progressive field, which is there now, and they were trying to pattern them off old fields, like mostly people talk about Fenway. If you're a baseball fan, Fenway in Boston and the Cubs Wrigley Field in Chicago were the 2 big ones, And they were trying to make them smaller, which it is. Progressive Field is like 30,000, and Cleveland was like 80,000. So it was a whole big different ball game. So anyway, there was a nostalgia going on, so people bought it. So I got lucky on that one. So anyway, since I made money on that one, I thought I'd try another one. This has got when I really got crazy. I took all my books. I'd already written all these stories for Cleveland Magazine, these history stories. And like I said, writing history is a lot of work. So I didn't really want to do that work again. But I already had the books written, because I already had these stories written. And my Elliot Ness story, the story about Terminal Tower, the Millionaire's Rose story, all those stories I put in, I'd already written them, so I asked Cleveland Magazine for permission. And actually, I found out I actually owned the story. They just had first printing rights, so I could copyright them. And that's something else you should do. If I forget to tell you, whenever you send it, before you show anything to anybody, copyright it. We'll talk about that something later too. But so I copyrighted it and I made the book, and now I got another book to sell to take to the bookstores. But since I knew the system and I knew all the bookstore managers, but the people told me I was crazy about this one too, because they said, Cleveland, this is back, in the day when Cleveland was the mistake on the lake. You guys all lived through that, right? The Cuyahoga River caught on fire. Laugh-In had a TV show, and he actually was a Cleveland writer that was making fun. They had Cleveland jokes on there. And people were telling me, you got to be crazy because, we're the mistake on the lake. Nobody cares about Cleveland, But I traveled all over the world in my younger days before I settled down. And I went to all these big cities like, Berlin and London and Paris. And I said, hey, Cleveland's Cleveland's a pretty good city, actually. It had some bad times, but the potential was there to be a great city, So I thought people would like it. And so I was lucky again. I was right, So I same thing. I got on Cleveland on the Lanigan. I got on the Morning Exchange. I got some Plain Dealer stories about it. And same thing again. So I was able to write this one and sold a ton of copies. I hate to say it, but I made 6 figures on this. We don't have any income tax people here, do we? IRS people? I don't know if I've ever told anybody that before. But I made over 6 figures on this book. I supported my family for a couple of years on this one. I was laid off from my real job. I was working on the railroad, actually. That's another story. So that's how I was paying the bills, working on the railroad. So, and to get off the subject real quick too, you mentioned the fire station. So I got laid off the railroad. I got on the fire department, and I was working at the station over there on 66th and Chester, right by League Park. So I drive by it all the time and check that out. But that's when I fell in love with this building, which I have to thank you guys again. I meant to tell this at the introduction that, you know, we drive the fire truck past here, and I think, what up, you know, what's this Rowfant Club? You know, what is this place, you know? I thought it was like, you know, I don't know if you ever, most of you are books lovers, you probably read Sherlock Holmes, and I always read all his short stories, you know, and the Rowfant, it sounded like one of those short stories that he would write, you know, that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, you know, the Rowfant Club, you know. So it was always a mystery to me, and now the mystery's solved. I want to thank Ed and Ed for that mystery. So just to talk about one more book here. So I didn't want to write history anymore because it's too much work. So I wanted to write, I thought I should write a novel because I always wanted to write novels. And, you know, you want to be a writer, everybody wants to write the great American novel. So like we mentioned, we were talking earlier, since I didn't go to my Ed Bank scholarship, I didn't go to Cleveland State, I went to Kent, where Liz was. And we were there for the May 4th shootings. You know, that was May 4th, 1970. I'm sure you all lived through that. People don't realize that was an international event. I had a girlfriend actually that I was dating at the time. She was going in Switzerland, and she was doing, you know, one of those exchange programs, you know, student exchange programs in Switzerland. And the same day it happened, she saw like one of these Times Square things, you know, with all the lights on it by downtown, whatever the city she was in. You know, 4 students get killed at Kent State. She couldn't believe it. Same day. I mean, it went all the way to, you know, Switzerland. So this just tells you it was an international incident. So I thought, well, this is such a big, you know, incident. And it was on the cover of Life magazine. I mean, it's a tragedy, but it was on the cover of Life. It was on the cover of Newsweek. It was a, you know, it was a big deal. So I thought that I'd write a novel about, and I was there, and just about the times, because it's not so much. This isn't political or anything. This is just how crazy the times were on May 4th, and leading up to May 4th. You know, and all the craziness that happened. And since I was there, I didn't have to do any research. It was all right here, except a little check out some things, you know. So I wrote this book, and same thing. I couldn't find a publisher. You try to find a publisher, you have to first you have to have an agent. Most publishers won't even talk to you unless you have an agent. So you got to get an agent, and they won't even talk to you unless you know somebody, you know. And it's just, I don't know if any of you have gone through this. It's so hard. And I tried it for about 6 months, gave up, and I couldn't get an agent. I couldn't get a publisher. So I said, I'm gonna try it myself again, you know. So same thing. I had a friend of my sister's friend. She's an artist. She did this nice cover, but it's a little different, about hippies. I called it. She came up with the title Hippies too. I was going to call it about I had a bunch of crazy names, and she came up with the title. I have to thank her for that. She came up with this, with the flowers on it. And there's the house we lived in. It's mostly about the house we lived in that year and all the crazy stuff going on that went around us, you know, leading up to the tragedy. So she, you know, so she did this one for me, and same thing. And I printed it myself, and I thought, well, if I can make some copies and sell it, maybe I can get a publisher, because what I wanted to do was go national. And that's a whole different ballgame than selling in Cleveland. You know, I'd done good in Cleveland, and this one, but being in Northeast Ohio, I thought a lot of Cleveland people would buy it. And if I sold some copies, I could, you know, maybe talk on sole publisher instead of just saying, hey, you know, I try this book that no one ever heard of. I'm actually selling copies, and I could prove it to them. So actually it worked. I don't know how many copies I sold, but I was selling this thing, and I was getting some good reviews and all that. So except everyone said the covers and the type was kind of strange for back then. If you look at it, this is a real collector's item anyway. You can't hardly find these anymore. I don't know where I found it. So anyway, I found a real publisher, and it was from Berkeley, California, of all places. He got a hold of me. His name was Creative Arts. So I thought, hey, Berkeley, you know, hippies, Kent State, you know, all that's going on in Cal. So I thought, this is perfect if he's in California. So he came up. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong book. Yeah. There's mine here. So he came up with this bigger book, and I just noticed this. I was only selling this thing for $6.95, $5.95, $6. Well, he came up with these charts. He made it a bigger book and a different cover, and called the Hippies, and $20. He's charging $20 for it. But the trouble is, if you get a publisher, you only get a royalty. You know, for those of you who are interested in doing this, Like, you know, on a $20 book, you'll maybe get $1 or 50 cents on each one they sell. Let's see, and the reason I made so much money on this one was because after I paid for the printing, everything else was on me. It cost me $10 to print it. Oh, and you have to cut it. The bookstore gets their cut, though, too. I meant to tell you that. The bookstore gets a 60-40 cut. Like, in other words, they get 40%. And for a $10 book, they get $4. So you're out of your $6, and it costs $2 to print it. So by the time you pay for everything else, it cost me $10 for the bookstore and the printing. But then I sold it for $20. I made $10 on every book, you know, instead of 50 cents. That's the big difference. Am I talking too fast for you? Because I got this on. If you have any questions, you can ask or interrupt me. I don't care. But anyway, this is a $20 book again. So I was like, I don't know what I got on this, 50 cents or something. And it was selling good, though. Here's the interesting thing to me was this is right when the internet was starting. Emails and all that, it was starting. And so they said, you have to have an email address. I didn't know what an email was, and I got that. And I'm getting these emails from people in Uruguay, from the Netherlands. I remember these countries. What was the other country? Netherlands and Uruguay and some other strange country. They're sending me, oh, we liked hippies, you know. I said, how did you find out about it, you know? But that was the difference, is that, you know, people from all over the world now could know about your book because because the internet was starting, you know. And I didn't know how he did it, the publisher, but I couldn't believe it, you know. I wish I'd saved those. I wish I had them somewhere, but there's one other country. And, you know, a lot of people around the country, California, were telling me, hey, yeah, we like hippies, you know. So that was cool. So, but I wasn't making as much money being a publisher. So what happens? I'm doing great. So I go on a speaking tour. I think he mentioned that I went to Harvard and Yale and Columbia on the East Coast, and I was talking to college kids. I was really pumping it up, and then he goes bankrupt on me. So, so since he went bankrupt, he gave up all his rights and everything. So I just took over the book, and since I knew how to self-publish, I published it myself again, you know. So here I am self-publishing it again, and so I kind of put it aside for a while, and I self-published it, and then after that, I was doing good on it, but you know, books only have a little life. If you ever write a book or something else, they only have a short lifespan, most of them, you know. When it first comes out, everybody wants to read it. You get the same thing you get on TV. I was on TV about this one too. I remember being on a morning exchange, and I dressed like a hippie for it or something. So the same thing, you get a little publicity, you sell a bunch of books, and then, you know, 6 months later, no one, you know, they move on to the next book. You know, so anyway, I was selling those, and I had to figure out what I'm going to do with it, and I just put it away and got onto my next book, and I started writing. That's when I started writing about the West Tech book. But that's when Amazon appeared too. So Amazon has changed everything. That's the big difference. So if any of you guys want to talk to me afterwards, I'm trying to make this short and sweet, and I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, but by the time Amazon came along, I could do this one, and the only thing that cost me, Amazon will now print a book, will publish it for you. If you want to be self-published, it's real easy. Like this one I did. The West Tech Terrorist, he talking about this one. I wrote about my college, I wrote about my high school. My next book's going to be about teenage, maybe junior high school, I think. But so I wanted to write a book about West Tech because it was such a great school. But I want to make it interesting. I didn't want to just write, you know, hey, West Tech's a great school, you know, that's kind of boring. So I wrote about, my dad also went there. And when he went there were 5,000 kids at West Tech. And so he was there too, and it was when I was there, it was still such a good school as it was when my dad was there. It was all the same stuff. And we had all these different, I just had a little talk about this. You know, like we had all these shop classes and all this great stuff, you know. It was really a good school. It was considered one of the best schools in the country. Yeah, go ahead.
I have to ask, based on your cover, I mean, that's not based on, there weren't actually Nazi sympathizers at West Tech, were there?
No, that's why I got some heat from the West Techers about this. But it is historically accurate. I know somebody, especially the older guys, hey, what'd you put a swastika on the cover? Well, that's what the artist did, you know. But there was something called the Bun Clubs. I don't know if I happened to run into this. They were like German American at the beginning. You know, people didn't realize at the beginning of World War II that how bad Hitler was, because they didn't have the internet, they didn't have, you know, information. You know, and the German people actually elected him because he turned their economy around. They were all beat up after World War I, and they liked him at first, you know. they didn't realize what he was going to do to the country and start wars on 2 fronts and all that stuff, you know. So anyway, there was something in America, the Bund clubs were German-American clubs that liked him. And so I kind of took this German-American Bund club and put it in West Tech, and it makes it a mystery. It's a mystery, but it's also a love story, and a couple of students discover it, and they try to, and they get in danger, and they try to, to make this short and sweet, they try to stop the Bund club or the Nazis try to do something inside West Tech, and they try to stop it, you know, even outside West Tech. So, you know, I just try to make it interesting. I thought that Bund club was kind of interesting, but it is based on historical fact. That's a good point, though. So, yeah, I got a lot of heat for that from the West Techers, you know. But same thing, I wasn't writing this for the West Techers. I was writing this to be national, you know, to be a national story, to show off West Tech in an interesting way, so they get their interest in it, you know. So, and I didn't market this one. That's the problem. I didn't really do as much marketing. I didn't sell that many copies. It's still on my list. But anyway, so now you can go to the Amazon and something called, if you want to write this down or talk to me afterwards, called Create Space. And they'll actually take your phone calls, which is amazing when you try to call Amazon or Google or anybody. It's called Create Space, and what they do, they'll do everything for you if you want. You have to pay them. I use my own people. I like to get my own artists, like I said, my sister and my friends that are artists, and do the cover, and find out they do the layout inside. There's the layout on the inside, layout on the outside, and set it up because of the way I want it, you know. But if you don't want to do that, it costs you a little money. You have to pay for pay for a cover, and you have to pay for somebody to set up the inside. But the thing to do is you get your book, you know, you're writing all your typewritten pages, you know, you put it in make it a digital copy, you know, because they don't want to mess with hard copies anymore, so you can send it to them. And copyright it. I tell everybody, that's what I tell all writers, copyright, 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 because I tell you there's a lot of thieves out there. I can tell you a little story. Actually, I tell them a story, I don't know. I'll tell you my thief story real quick. When I was young and dumb and got out of high school, out of college, out of Kent, you know, and same thing I wanted to write. I wrote a short story, and I sent it around to New York, because I figured that's a good story. I wanted to get it published, and you know, back then, they don't even know what any publishes short stories. Playboy publishes short stories back at people. A lot of people said Playboy was better for the short stories than for the pictures. I don't believe that, but they would, you know, there was a lot of places like Esquire, and there was the magazines that would print fiction, you know. So I did this fiction short story. I sent it to about 20 people in New York. I didn't even know better, but you're supposed to put in a self-addressed stamped envelope, so if they don't want it, or if they want it, they mail it back to you. You know, it's just about 10 pieces of paper, you know, little thing. And I never heard back from any of them. And because I didn't do that, I guess that was one mistake. I didn't copyright it, was another mistake. 2 years later, there's a movie, same name, same plot, everything. I said, this isn't just a coincidence. You know, somebody in New York got that, my short story, made a movie out of it, you know. But I couldn't prove it. I was young and dumb, and I said, well, I learned my lesson. Copyright, 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 before you send it to anybody, you know. So anyway, that's another little lesson. But anyway, you go to Create Space, you send them your copy, you know, you digitize it, you know, a little attachment. They'll set it up for you. You got to pay them for a little bit. They'll do the cover, they'll design it, and you can agree, you know, if you like it or you want to change it, and go back and forth with them. They'll talk to you on the phone, and then all of a sudden, you got a book, you know, and you don't have to go to a printer. You don't have to put up any money, except maybe, I think it costs me maybe $1,000 to set it up. That's paying my artists, but you have to pay them too for some of their stuff, you know. Most of it's free, though, you know. But the thing is, now you have a book, and they don't print, like I said, I had to print like 1,000 copies to make any money on it. I took a gamble, you know. I had to put up my own money. That's what the publisher used to do. You know, they had to believe in your book, and they had to, you know, put up some money and some copies, and they'd publish them, and then they would, you know, take the gamble, and they had to sell them, and they'd market them, you know. Well, now you can go to Create Space, you get a book, and they don't print the book until somebody orders it. That's the beauty of Amazon. See, like he said, you can get them on Amazon. If you want to buy any of these books on Amazon, they're all on Amazon. You go to my name under Amazon or my website. I'll tell you that right now. It's just peterjedick.com. And I got all my books listed there. You can click on there and order them through that, or go to Amazon and punch in my name and it'll come up, all my books. And, you know, if you want a hippies book, you know, you just order it and then they print it and mail it to you. But they, you know, I don't have to pay for 10,000 books and hope that I make some money on it, you know. And if I sell 10,000 copies, well, that's even better because, and the thing is, since you're self-published, you're not paying a publisher. So, like I said, on a $20 book, you're making maybe 10 bucks, you know, or some. Amazon gets their cut too for doing that for you, but they're like the publisher, and they're not charging you a lot, like a royalty, like the big time authors do, you know. So basically, that's my story. I went through it pretty quick. I hope I didn't go too fast. Any questions, or go ahead, sir.
I'd like to know what your editor at Cleveland Magazine had to say once you got the story printed on Lee Clark.
I never asked him.
Never
I should. Maybe I did. I don't remember. You know, I was a freelancer. I wasn't there in the office every day. You know, I'd stop in the office and sit down with him, and then I'd be gone. You know, I didn't do the day-to-day operations with him. But he was a good guy. Cleveland. I was just at this press club today. Real quick, Cleveland Magazine was so much different back then. They were doing investigative journalism like crazy. They were doing all kinds of stuff. Now it's, I hate to say it, you know, it's just not the same. What? It's advertising, it's lists. What's the top 10 candy places in the city? What's the best ice cream places, you know? That's what it is, you know. I mean, I can tell you why that happened, but that's a long story too. Sir, yeah.
Can you talk about how does Amazon work?
There you go.
They have you price your own book? Does it depend on what you ask them to do? What's the specifics of the economics?
That's a good question. I think I always made my own price, but I'm sure they have to get enough money out of it to cover their costs of printing it. So I'm sure they're not going to let you, you know, ask for pay $2 because they still have to print it. Somebody has to print it and pay for the printing, you know. They probably give you a base price of what it costs them, and then you can add whatever you want to it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Answer your question? Yeah. Okay. And you?
Yeah, I ran into a guy who self-publishes.
All right, want to take that? I want to take this, I guess, so they can hear it on the Zoom. Yeah.
Self-publishes, and he said that he's developed a readership of about 9,000 or 10,000 fans,
Wow.
and they buy his stuff whenever he comes out with it.
Wow, that's great.
Did you run into that at all?
Well, that's all that marketing stuff. Yeah, you got to you can be a Facebook. You got to get a Facebook page. All my books had their own Facebook page. Like I just had hippiesbook.com and I had westtechterrace.com. So the book has its own Facebook page, and you put reviews on there and that's what, you know, that's what young people do now. Everything is on Facebook. Everything is on you know, the internet. So you can, if you know somebody that knows how to advertise on the internet, like that guy, he's doing great. If he's got 10,000 followers, yeah. And if he can sell 10,000 copies, that's a lot of money. And he's making at least $2-3 on a copy. He's making a lot of money, you know, on 10,000 copies. So, yes, sir. You want to take this? That's for the Zoom people, I guess, so they can hear it on Zoom.
I have a friend whose daughter is self-published, and I think she's working on her third book now.
Yeah.
But she writes under a pseudonym. So do you have to go through the legal process of having a lawyer to write under a pseudonym? Do you know?
I never did that, but I'm sure you better, because like I said, as far as copyrights go and all that, so you probably want to copyright it in your name and then officially have it a pseudonym. I never did it, but yeah, you always talk to a lawyer and cover your butt, you know. I say that because you really have to watch all that stuff, the copyrights, and a pseudonym probably would have to do something like that, I'm sure, just to make sure. That's right.
I read about the guy who wrote The Martian, and apparently he started out by selling chapters at 95 cents a piece
Wow.
on the internet.
Jeez.
And then he got a big following, and somebody offered him movie rights.
Well, that's the key.
Have you
The
tried
blogger,
that?
yeah. Go ahead.
Have you tried that, selling chapters on the internet?
No, I haven't tried that. That's a good idea. Like I said, I don't like to play with the internet that much. I mean, I'm kind of, you know, the younger people can do that better than me. I know, but I know how to do Facebook. I know how to do it, but I don't like, you can spend your whole day just sitting on the internet, you know. But the movie rights is where to make the money, and I hate to say it because I don't want to jinx myself, but somebody did write a screenplay. I wrote a screenplay. I sent it to Hollywood, and there's about my hippies book, and somebody's rewriting it right now, and they're going to shop it around for me. So you never know. That's where you make the money. You know, making money on books is not easy. It's a lot of work, and I don't want to discourage you, but you have to have a passion for it. You don't do it for the money, so go ahead.
Peter, we've had speakers in the past, a couple of authors who started off on Amazon self-publishing and apparently did well enough for Amazon or a publisher to pick up and get in touch with them and say, you know, we'll publish the book.
Yeah.
Do you know of any incidences that like that, or what it would take for a regular publisher to pick up on a self-published book if its sales were big enough?
I don't know the details, but yeah, that's like basically what I was saying I did with this book, you know. I was able to sell enough copies I could write publishers. I wrote I wrote a stock letter. That was back when you had to write letters that said, hey, I sold 2,000 copies of this. There's interest in it, you know, or whatever, and would you be interested in publishing? That's how I got the publisher for this one, you know, for the bigger version, the better version. So it's the same book. It's just the way it's packaged and everything and marketed, you know. But that's it, you know. That's what you want to do. You know, if you can show a publisher there's interest, and you know, it's all data driven, and they call it data driven on a computer. You know, you can say, hey, here's how many hits I got. I got 10,000 hits last week, you know, and then somebody will pick you up, I guess. Sure, go ahead.
Who is writing about Cleveland now that you would want to read?
I don't know. We talked about that at the press club meeting today. They had a panel discussion talking about today what happened to journalism in Cleveland, and it's pretty sad. Like I said, they used to have 400 people writing for the Plain Dealer, and I get 60. And I'd like to write a column for them, but they don't want me. They kind of canceled me. That's a long story too. And maybe Cleveland Magazine. I talked to the Cleveland Magazine editor about maybe writing for them, but we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, it's like I talked to the Cleveland Magazine guy. I said I'd like to write a humor column once a month. I like to do humor too. And I said, remember Dick Fagler? You know, I used him as an example. You know, and he even wrote a book that said, have you read Fagler today? That was the title of the book, because people would even say that, hey, have you read Fagler today, you know? People would actually buy the paper to read him. And I don't think we have anybody like that today. I wish we did. But I think that's a real tragedy, what's happened to them. Oh, a friend of mine, Dan Coughlin, I'd have to say him. I would say you should get him to come talk to you. He'll have you laughing like crazy. Dan Coughlin, he's a great storyteller. He's a buddy of mine, and I called him about you guys, and he seemed interested. If you ever want to have a guest speaker, you should try and get him. He was a great sports writer. But I'll tell you, I got enough time for another good story about kind of where me and Dan Coughlin came in, did the same thing. I don't know if you remember when he was writing for the Plain Dealer. You know, he's a sports writer, and the press was trying to compete with the Plain Dealer. They even started a Sunday paper, because that's where they were getting killed, because, you know, the Plain Dealer had Sunday and the press didn't. I love the press, the afternoon paper. And you even had a Sunday paper for a while, and they said, we're going to compete with the Plain Dealer. We're going to knock them, you know, we're going to go get them, you know, because there was always the big competition. So they paid Coughlin a big bonus to come over, to stole them from the Plain Dealer. That was like an icon. They got him to come over. And then that's when I was writing my Cleveland history stuff for Cleveland Magazine, so I went to talk to him. And I talked to him, and he said, oh, yeah, we like, you know, and I was writing, I did a year, I didn't talk to you, I did a year as a reporter at Sun newspaper. That's another story. I said I wrote for Sun newspaper, I wrote for Cleveland Magazine. So I talked to him, I remember his name, Tony Tucci, I think was his name. He was managing editor for the press. He says, we're gonna hire you. You're the next guy we're gonna hire, you know. I said, oh man, this is my dream come true. Like I said, you know, I want to write for the press. And so I remember walking down East 9th Street. They had a big building there. Now it's the Jones Day or something right on 9th and Lakeside. And I was in heaven. You know, and I got on the elevator. Here's the best part of the story. I get on the elevator, like I was on the 3rd floor, and I'm going down the elevator. And I get on the elevator, and here's the guy that just bought it, Joe Cole. His name was Joseph Cole. And he was going to compete, and he bought the paper to compete. And I recognized him. I said, aren't you the owner? He said, yeah. I said, oh, I'm your new employee. You know, I'm going to start writing for you guys next week. He says, oh, good. He says, yeah. I said, how are things going? Oh, everything's going great. Everything's going great, you know. So next day, I go to sleep. I tell my wife, I say, hey, I got a job at the press. I'm doing great, man. This is my dream come true. Next day, I wake up, pick up the Plain Dealer. There's a headline this big, you know. Plain Dealers are those big types sometimes, like, you know, Pearl Harbor or something. Cleveland Press closes. The next day, after I was going to get hired, they closed the paper. So I always take credit for killing the Cleveland Press. I killed the Cleveland Press. They hired me and they went out of business. But I always hated the owner because the owner and nobody knew it. None of those people that were working for the press knew it. You know, they were there and they didn't know it. And like I said, the owner lied to me in the elevator, you know, is how great they were doing. Next day it closed. So that was the end of the press. So that was the end of the story. Anyway, but that's what happened to Dan Coughlin. Anyway, that's my Dan Coughlin story. So he got screwed too because they got him and he left a good job at the Plain Dealer. But then he went to television and he did good. And he just barely got that television job. He'll tell you that story maybe if he talks to you. Ask him to tell you about how he went to the television. He was hurting. You know, he just got it at the skin of his teeth. He had a couple of kids too, and he was hurting for money. And when the TV8 or whoever it is that he works for. Anything else?
Any more questions?
Did I talk too long? Oh, go ahead.
So you mentioned May 1st, 1970.
Yeah.
If you would write a story about it, what would you say?
Oh, I wrote the hippies book about it, but it was just, everything was out of control, I think. I think both sides, you know, I don't try to blame either side, but I think I blame the kids a little bit, you know what I'm talking about, right? May 4th, 1970, when the 4 students were shot at Kent State. Well, I tried to be in the middle, you know. A lot of kids I don't think they were too smart because I was a city boy, went to West Tech, you know, inner city, and I got mugged a couple of times, so I knew what things were, you know, knives and all that stuff and guns. And I don't think it was a smart idea to throw rocks at guys with guns, you know. So, but these kids were suburban kids, and they were kind of naive, I say, and they would throw rocks at the National Guard, and the National Guard, you know, that wasn't the whole reason, but because everything was building up. It was a long story. You have to look at it. There were 4 days, and it got worse and worse and worse. They had no right to shoot anybody and kill anybody. One of the girls I want to crack up too, because it kind of hurts me, is that one of the girls was one of my best friends. I wrote a story about the Plain Dealer about her, Sandy Scheuer. She was just walking to class, and she got killed. So that was a real tragedy. But that's all I can say is it was a tragedy on both sides. But real quick, all those suburban girls, they didn't think that there was any they didn't think there were any bullets in the gun. They came out later, you know. They said, "Oh, we didn't think the guns were loaded." I can't believe, you know, you got to be pretty naive. I'm sorry.
Does Dean Kaler get a mention in your book?
Oh yeah. Well, not in my book. I didn't use real name, fiction. Oh, some of them.
Yeah.
But Dean Kaler's a friend of mine now. Yeah, he's a real tragedy too. I did a couple radio interviews on the 50th anniversary of the shootings, and I was talking about Dean, and I don't know if you know him. He was in a wheelchair. Here's a poor kid. He was a freshman. What do freshmen know, you know? You're a freshman at college, and you're walking around, and a lot of people were just like me. I was a spectator. It could have been me. I was watching it. I wasn't protesting. You had about 200 kids protesting. You had about a couple thousand people around where was all the action was, the Commons, and we're just walking around. And he was a freshman. He didn't know anything. He's just watching. He got shot in the back, and he was in a wheelchair the rest of his life. But he's got a real good attitude. He's got very religious, and he became a commissioner, county commissioner. He did all kinds of good things after that. But he's never been out. You know, that's a real tragedy. It's a real tragedy.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. I think he'll be around if you have any other questions. Take a look at his books up here. Good night.